I think as soon as I realized like I was strong enough to let my heart break and let it break again and again and again, then I was strong enough to be in community and hold a community space.
Welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast. It's your girl, Kate Bryan. One Girl Revolution is a multimedia platform, a podcast, and a nonprofit dedicated to highlighting the stories of inspiring women and girls who are changing the world through their lives. Please subscribe to the One Girl Revolution podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. We're on YouTube at One Girl Revolution, and you can find all of our social media links, podcast episodes, documentaries, and so much more on our website at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number one, girlrevolution.com. This week's episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast features Halli Faulkner, founder of Porchlight Wellness. Halli is a survivor of childhood sexual assault and has memories of abuse beginning when she was 3 years old. Although Halli was able to compartmentalize this trauma and create a career for herself as a successful attorney, she knew deep down that something inside of her was off, and that she was carrying around deep-seated wounds from her past. In her late 20s, Halli began to use yoga and meditation to support her in healing from the trauma of her childhood and the PTSD she was experiencing as an adult. Now, as a trauma-informed yoga teacher and the executive director of Porchlight Wellness, she offers yoga workshops for fellow survivors and trains others in how to create safe and welcoming spaces for women who have experienced sexual assault and abuse. This episode of the podcast is powerful. I will warn you, as Halli does as well, that some of the things that we discuss are difficult, but it is so important for us to have spaces like this, like the One Girl Revolution podcast, to talk about these stories and topics. Please listen to and share this inspiring episode. Here's my conversation with Halli. Halli, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on to share your story, to share about the incredible work that you're doing. But before we get into that, I'd love to ask you, who is a One Girl Revolution in your life? Who's a woman or girl that's inspired you?
Yeah, so I have two. One is my maternal grandma. Her name was Jewel. We called her Bubby. And the other is my daughter, Ori, who just turned 2. So I, as we'll be talking about today, I do healing work with women who've experienced sexual trauma and sexual violence. I'm a survivor myself. And throughout my life, my Bubby would always, kind of in a joking way, refer to when she was growing up and she was kind of forced to do things in her childhood that she was uncomfortable with. And it wasn't until I started doing this work with survivors that I realized that my Bubby is one of us. 1 in 4 women experiences sexual trauma and sexual violence. So it's not surprising, but I just, it makes the work even more meaningful and deeper to me, knowing that I'm healing my own lineage through doing this work. And my daughter, Ori, exhausts me every day, as I think most 2-year-olds do. But she really also inspires me in the work I do, because at the end of the day, I want to make our world safer and more welcoming for her and for all girls and all women and all people who are female identifying. So, if I can go to bed at night and feel like I did a little bit to make the world just a little bit of a safer place for her to walk in, then I feel okay.
Yeah, well, it's so important and I think women that are listening to this podcast, we have the power to change the world. We have the power to heal wounds, like you shared about your grandmother. We have the power to heal those wounds. And then we also have the power to change the world for the next up and coming generation, for children, to protect them from things that we've experienced. And I think it's important, even like you sharing your own story. My hope is that podcast episodes like this can empower others to share their stories. And it's not just women, it's everybody has stories and things that they've been through and things that they want to share. And so that's why these stories are so important. And it's so important for us to reflect on the other people that are a part of our story too. Because I always talk about One Girl Revolution is obviously to focus on, woman like yourself, but also there's so many people around us that empower us and that support us and help us to become the person that we were created to be. So I'm just, again, so excited to have you on. So I would love to rewind and talk about your life. So talk about whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but just a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thank you. And I probably should have said this up front, but some of the things that I share, like I usually don't go into like all the details of the trauma I've experienced, but I talk about trauma a lot. So I just share that like as a content warning for people who are listening who might be triggered by some of the content. Like this is a space where you can press pause anytime, you can press stop, you can press delete on the podcast, right? Like I want us all to take care of ourselves and our nervous systems in a way that feels best for us. So wanted to share that at the outset. If I'm thinking about, the trauma-informed work I do now, and where kind of the roots of it started in my own life, I'll kind of rewind all the way back to when I was a little kid. I have memories of, being sexually assaulted and abused as when I was as young as like 3 years old. I can picture like the house I was in, like the room that I was in when it usually happened. And some people who are listening who have like memories of early childhood trauma know that when you're younger than 5 years old, like I was, the memories are very kind of amorphous. Like they're not as clear as like what I ate for breakfast yesterday or what I'm, had for breakfast this morning. They have a different kind of sense and quality to them, but the memories are still very visceral and I hold them in my body. And so I was abused all the way from when I was about 3 years old to about 9 or 10 years old. And I am very grateful because I have a resilient spirit, as so many women do, right? And I learned how to put the trauma in a box, so to speak, and it's called compartmentalization, right? Which I've learned later, compartmentalization, and put it in a box and just try to go on with the rest of my life as best that I could. Part of the way that I dealt with the trauma I was experiencing at home was I was kind of an overachiever, like in sports and in school. And I know this is very common. It was my kind of subconscious thinking was like, well, if I'm good at all these things and I seem like I'm perfect and I'm doing great, like no one will know about these other things that like, I don't even want to think about myself. Right. And so that kind of those coping strategies lasted a long time. I would say I was also very like emotionally shut down. I didn't really have that many close relationships. I was like, oh, such a mean girl, like in middle school or even before then. And I never really knew why. It was just kind of the way I moved through the world, right? To protect myself and keep myself safe. And so I, went to college, was like dean's list, like straight A's, not to brag. And then I became a teacher, got my master's degree, and then went to law school, started working in education policy. And so I had grown up in New York. And then after I graduated from law school, I moved to California. And it wasn't until I moved to California, started like practicing yoga, started moving my body, I think got far enough away from like my family and where I had grown up that I was like, oh shit, like I better start working through this. Cause like my professional life is going great, but like my personal life, like this shit is like real messy and like something is not going well in like my body and mind and spirit. Right. And so I decided I wanted to particularly my dating life, to be honest, like it was just a hot mess. And I was like, this is not right. And so I decided I wanted to take the lid off the box, so to speak, and work through some of what I had experienced as a child. And up until that point, so that was in my late 20s when I started to work through it, I hadn't talked about it at all, right? And so what you were saying at the beginning of the podcast about like the power of telling our stories really resonates with me, because in order to start my own healing process, like I had to talk to someone, right? So like I called my mom first, and then I called my stepdad, and then I talked to my best friend, and then I got a therapist. And it was really, to be honest, the combination of like intense trauma therapy and a daily yoga and meditation practice that got me through what I now know is called like the emergency stage for healing trauma, especially around like memory recovery, which is like, those first years or months when I start to remember the trauma and work through it can just be so difficult and so intense. And it definitely was for me. And it didn't go quickly, right? Like I started in trauma therapy. I started to have a daily yoga and meditation practice. There were a lot of ups and downs for me. And actually, I think it's important to share that when I first started trauma therapy, I was maybe the second session, I was diagnosed with PTSD, which was shocking to me. I knew that like quote unquote bad things had happened to me, but I knew that like something felt off, but it never occurred to me that I had PTSD. Like, I just thought that was something that like other people have, not me. So I think it's important to kind of normalize that experience for me. And I'm happy to talk more about that. But anyway, I started, the trauma therapy, and then about 4 or 5 years in, I started feeling okay enough in my mind, body, spirit to want to share some of the tools that I had learned for healing, and decided I want to, learn how to teach yoga and meditation and just start sharing some healing tools with survivors, particularly with women who've experienced sexual trauma and sexual violence. And that desire, right, to share some of the tools that I had learned is really how I discovered kind of my purpose and my destiny, and the thing that kind of helps me feel fulfilled, and really makes me happy at this point in my life. So we can talk much more about that, but that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
Yeah. Well, and what you experience just compartmentalizing things in our lives, I think we all
Yeah.
can relate to that, right? Like that we've all been through difficult things throughout our life, maybe when you were a child, or maybe in your adult years, or maybe in college. Like we all have different things. And the natural human thing is to kind of push it down and then distract, right? So like, okay, I'm going to be on the dean's list. Okay, I'm going to get perfect. If I just fit in and I'm perfect. And I have shared on this podcast before just a little bit about my own story. And I had terrible eczema as a little kid, where I'd like itch my hair out and my little face was raw. And I was a feisty little kid, and I went to school and started getting bullied. And my parents didn't know what was going on, but I became this very insular little kid. I didn't want to talk. I was like, just fearful for even anyone to notice me, to look at me. And so I started getting I was really hard on myself. If I missed like a single question on a test or something, if I got one thing wrong, I just wanted to I didn't want attention. And that's your story. That's so many other people's stories, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to compartmentalize. I'm going to ignore this thing that I have to work through and just try to be perfect. And there's such a pressure in our culture today to be perfect. But like, what is perfect? There is no perfect. All of us want this perfectly curated social media. And the reality is we are all human beings. There's so many facets to us. And it's so important for us to share our stories. And, having you on the podcast, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so that was part of, wanting to have you on. But we need to be talking about sexual assault all the time, and we need to bring an end to it. And the only way that it's going to end is if people tell their stories, and like what you're doing, bringing people together and empowering other people to share their stories, to bring an end to it, and to protect, just like you shared about your little daughter, protecting kids from now on.
Yeah. I appreciate what you say about the compartmentalization. And we talk about this in our teacher training, which is that our coping mechanisms, right, are actually really powerful, like survival skills. And compartmentalization can often be really, really helpful, right? And so like an easy example, so I'm Jewish and I celebrate Shabbat with my family every Friday. And like, no matter what happens at work that week, like if, my boss says like the most obnoxious thing on Friday at 3 p.m., like I'm going to put that in a container and I'm going to leave that there until Monday morning so that my body can like rest and digest over the weekend. So these are actually really helpful skills that we develop. And I think the practice of mindfulness allows me to do and allows us to do is choose, like, okay, right now I want this in the compartment, or like right now I'm going to take the compartment off the shelf and open it up a little bit because I have some space to work through it. And I think that for me has been really empowering.
Yeah, no, that's a really good thing to think about too. And even one of my friends always talks about how women are like spaghetti, like everything is connected to everything else, and then men are like these little boxes, like they put and I don't know that that's a very big generalization, but it's interesting. I've started noticing in myself, and like even from a communication standpoint, somebody mentions one thing and it becomes this like trigger that's connected to everything else, and then I turn into like a pile of tears. And so it's important for us to see the positive too of like the compartmentalization of things and saying like, okay, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with this now. And also to see that for other people too, in relationships and families,
Yeah.
like, hey, do you have the bandwidth to talk about X, Y, or Z? Because sometimes we also have to respect other people's ability to be able to talk about things too. Watch In Tandem, the new short documentary by One Girl Revolution, which highlights the incredible story of Caitlin Cullen and her restaurant in Milwaukee, The Tandem. The Tandem is more than a restaurant. It's a family, a community that at its height was a bustling restaurant serving food and supporting every single person who walked through its doors in one way or another. If someone needed a job, you got it. Having a bad day and needing a smile or a laugh, The Tandem's got you. Having a rough time and need support, The Tandem isn't just a restaurant, it's your family. They got you. When COVID hit in March 2020, The Tandem stepped up to serve the community in a new way. They stopped selling food to customers and started solely feeding people in need. The Tandem community ended up feeding over 115,000 people during the first year of the pandemic. Absolutely incredible. Get to know Caitlin and the Tandem story in One Girl Revolution's new short documentary, In Tandem. Watch In Tandem today at onegirlrevolution.com or on YouTube. Please watch and share this inspiring story.
I mean, I feel like the deeper I go into my own healing process, and like the more I work with survivors and people who work with survivors, like I think the deeper I lean into like my own empathy, not just for other people, but really for myself, and like forgiving myself and like holding a space of grace for myself and like love for myself. Cause like we all go through so much, like this world is a wild place. And I don't know, I just want to lift up that empathy is part of the work too.
Yeah, it's so true. And for you, like getting into yoga and getting into mindfulness, and I know just reading on your website and reading a little bit about your story, I know that you first kind of came into contact with yoga, but it wasn't until you moved out to LA that you really got into it and got into mindfulness and, dealing with all these things that are coming up, PTSD. I know that life is just full of, I think life is a journey through healing. The human experience is so interesting and, we go through many traumas throughout our lives. But how has that experience been for you in like finding healing? I know you're still on the journey like all of us are, but has that kind of played out in your life?
In 2019, myself and a small team of female-led, survivor-led team founded the organization I lead now called Porchlight Wellness. And we provide healing yoga workshops for survivors and train people in how to create safe spaces for survivors. I had the vision for Porchlight when I was at this week-long yoga festival in New Mexico on this, like, I was camping out in a mountaintop and I was like looking out across the desert, which, now with a 2-year-old daughter, I have literally zero free time. So I'm like, how did I even like camp out on a mountaintop for a week with no cell phone? But I did it. And I'm lucky I did, right? Because I got in touch with this vision of just like an organization that holds just like a safe and welcoming and healing space for survivors, and like a space where we can share healing tools with each other. And, after that, I started teaching just one-off workshops in California, kind of up and down the coast. And I noticed that every time I taught a workshop, even if it was like a brand new yoga studio or a community center I've never been to, it would fill up. And I kept having the image of like a dry sponge being put in water and then just like filling up with water. Because that's really how it felt. Like these rooms would just fill with women who I heard over and over again, like, I've never talked about this before. I've never been in a space. I've never met any other survivors before, which is, of course, wild to me because, like, if you know women, you know hundreds and thousands of survivors. Like 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 women has experienced sexual trauma. So we all know survivors, right? Whether or not we know it. So just starting to be a part of that healing, like a community space, I think was deeply healing for me in and of itself. And, eventually we founded our organization and, we have like a survivor-led board. We create spaces not only to center survivors and center women, but to center women of color who are more likely to experience sexual violence than white women. I want to also, use this spotlight to highlight the stories of Indigenous women in particular, because about 50% or more of Indigenous women experience sexual violence and have almost no access to the healing services they need in the aftermath, or even the legal, remedies they need in the aftermath. So I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, but I guess I would say that for me, the point at which I started to feel like I could heal in community with other survivors, or even just be in safe spaces with other survivors, kind of revolutionized, I think, my own healing journey.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about that community. And I'm such a huge supporter of women supporting women. And that's really what this podcast is about too. You look at even, I'm from Michigan, I'm in Michigan, and the Larry Nassar case is one that people widely know. And Rachel Denhollander was such a revolutionary, and we've had her on this podcast, she was the first woman to stand up and say, that she was assaulted, she was abused by him. And then you look at the army that it rose up around her, that's like hundreds and hundreds of women that stood up, and Larry Nassar is being brought to justice because of that. And so I think it's so important to highlight these different stories. You brought up Indigenous women, which is something that I'm so passionate about. And we're actually, One Girl Revolution is working on a series that's specifically about Indigenous women, because we don't hear about the murdered and missing Indigenous women or the assault on Indigenous women. And we need to be talking about it because it's so easy in this day and age, especially because we're all busy and social media is so busy. We're just there's constant chaos, I feel like, in our lives. But there are so many stories specifically of women that just kind of get marginalized and ignored. And so we need to elevate those stories. And that's really what you're doing through Porchlight Wellness and all the great work that you're doing. So I want to know, was there like a spark moment when you and the other founders of Porchlight Wellness, you were like, all right, we're doing all this work. We need to start this. Like, what was the moment that you decided to start Porchlight Wellness?
To be honest, I think creating our nonprofit organization, Porchlight Wellness, was just a matter of practicality. I kept teaching kind of one-off yoga workshops for survivors. And when I moved to DC, I guess in 2018, so I moved from California to DC in 2018 on New Year's Day, actually, with my wife. And there was just so much demand for these workshops for survivors, both in DC and then, in New York, and where I was traveling to teach. And I was like, well, I can't do this all by myself. Like, I think one of the ways that my trauma sometimes manifests is that I try to do it all myself. And so I'm learning to kind of operate as a team rather than as an individual. And so we created the organization so we could train other teachers, bring other teachers on board, support more communities and have more workshops. So it wasn't just like reliant on me. And so we could kind of build a true community around our work.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And what you were sharing before too, just about different cultures and different communities, there's so much that we can learn from one another. And at the end of the day, we're all the same in our humanness. We're all the same in our humanity. And so it's so important to learn and experience different things. And what I love so much about yoga and mindfulness and, meditation and breath work, I mean, there's so many different things that's quieting those voices inside of us. We have these voices that are like, you can't do this, or why not, why you, why would you be chosen to do this great thing, or why should you start this organization? And we really need to quiet those voices and figure out like who is the person inside of us. I spent some time in Cook County Jail in Chicago and spent some time with a professor that taught storytelling to women. And she taught this amazing class called Storytelling as a Healing Art. And she talked so often about people who are incarcerated. First of all, they're forgotten about. We're talking about marginalized people and forgotten about people. People who are incarcerated are so often forgotten about. Put them behind bars and we don't know anything about them or their stories or their humanness, their where they come from and who they are as people. But these women, it was so amazing. I was sharing with them about One Girl Revolution, and they talked about when they were little girls, they had all these like hopes and dreams, and they were just reminded in this moment when we were just talking about One Girl Revolution. I just started the podcast, and they were like, I want to remember that little girl. I want to remember that person that I was created to be, because that's us in our most simple form, right? Like when we are just born, we're little babies, like there's nothing bad has happened to us yet. And so really reconnecting, to me, that's what yoga and so many of these other things are, is like reconnecting with that seed, that person that we were created to be. And really kind of like it brings us to our purpose. Like you were sharing about your own life journey and figuring out who you are and what you were created to do. And, being able to share your story and empower others. We need those moments. And so that's what's so incredible about what you're doing with Porchlight Wellness is you're not only connecting with yourself, that little seed, that little girl inside of you, but you're helping everyone else connect with that person that they were created to be.
Thanks for saying that. Did you have like something you wanted to be when you grew up?
That's a good question. Well, when I was little, I wanted to be a doctor, which I wanted to be a doctor, or I wanted to be like a country music star, which is so funny, Halli, because I'm like, neither of those things have happened. But it's amazing to see how life continues to go. And I think that probably part of wanting to be a doctor was back to your point about empathy. I think because of things that I went through as a little kid, I always had this empathy, and I wanted to understand why people believe what they believe, or why they do, even why they do bad things, right? Like I always am like kind of on this search, which is how the podcast started. I'm like so curious to learn about people's stories and want to elevate other people's stories. And then the country musician, who knows, like I mean, I am happy talking in front of people. So maybe that's kind of where it started. But yeah, I think, we might have these hopes and dreams and it might not turn out how we expect, but sometimes it's better. And most of the time it's better if we just, really dig down and find that purpose.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to be a newscaster when I was a little kid, and I'm so grateful because my mom, I think I was probably like 10 or 11, and my mom, for Take Your Daughter to Work Day, my mom was a midwife, which was really cool, but I never wanted to be a midwife. But so for Take Your Daughter to Work Day, she reached out to our local news station and like arranged for me to like shadow this woman, this African-American woman who was like a news anchor for the day. Her name was Wanda. I forget her last name. I wish I knew it now, but it was like honestly one of the best days of my life. Like it was so cool to watch this badass woman like put together the news for the day and then like practice the script and then read it. So shout out to my mom. Thanks, Mom, for organizing that.
Yeah, it's those little things, and those little things stick with us, right? Like here you are doing a podcast, and it's like maybe you didn't become a newscaster, but that prepared you for what you're doing now, and the work that you're doing and being able to talk in front of people. And yeah, you're just such a gift, and I'm just so grateful to be connected with you and to be able to highlight your work. So for people that are listening, talk a little bit more. I know you shared a little bit about the work that you do with Porchlight Wellness, but what is Porchlight Wellness? And tell the listeners about the work that you guys do.
Yeah, thank you. So we like to think of our organization as kind of like a bright and welcoming light for anyone who wants to come walk on up to our porch and kind of join us in community. We offer, so we are our mission is to provide healing yoga workshops for women who have experienced sexual violence, and then train people in how to create and hold healing spaces for survivors, while centering women of color, particularly Black, Indigenous, Latinx women who have, experienced sexual violence and kind of don't have access to the healing services they deserve. So practically speaking, we have kind of two buckets of work. We have our yoga workshops for survivors, which right now we're offering online every Sunday evening. So if you're listening and you're a survivor, you're always, always, always welcome to join us. We offer sliding scale rates for, you choose a price that works for you. And then we have our teacher training, which happens a few times a year, also online. So anyone in the world can join us, which is a 40-hour training that, teaches basic yoga, meditation, mindfulness, trauma-informed tools for people to kind of, hold spaces and be mindful, I think, of survivors in their everyday work. We have a lot of people from different, kind of health and human services joining us. So we have therapists, doulas, classroom teachers, nurses, all joining us for our teacher training. So that's like a really cool and special place. I'm grateful for all of it. It's just really amazing work that I'm proud of. And I mentioned to you, Kate, that we founded our organization in 2019, and we've been so kind of laser focused on getting the work right. So like making sure our workshops are like a beautiful beginning, middle, and end, and fully trauma informed, fully safe and inclusive to the extent that we can, right? We're always learning. And then making sure that our teacher training is just a badass training, and the content is like gorgeous, and it looks right, and it's what people want and all that good stuff. And now I feel like, let's say 3 years into our life as an organization, I'm going to take a breath. I'm like, okay, we got like the programming right. Like, let's start actually sharing our work. So I would say, if you're listening and any of this speaks to you, our workshops, our teacher training, like, please reach out, please check us out. Always happy to, talk more. And then I would say, especially like, if you're listening and there's anyone in your life that you think would be interested. As I said earlier, like, we all know a survivor, whether we know it or not. So whether it's your sister or your cousin or your coworker or your auntie, like, share our website with them, share our Instagram with them. I think, to be honest, sometimes even just like knowing that we exist as an organization can be very powerful and helpful and healing for people. I hear from a lot of people who like subscribe to our newsletter, for example, and, they're like, hey, I never joined a workshop or never joined your training, but just want to let you know, like, your newsletter makes a big difference to me, which I don't know, as someone who sends out newsletters, like that, that's good to know, because I'm like, is this going into the ether? Like, is anyone reading this? But at the end of the day, I'm really grateful to kind of be on a team that holds all these revolutionary and healing spaces.
Donate to One Girl Revolution's nonprofit organization to help us continue our work, highlighting inspiring women and girls that are changing the world through their lives, promoting their work and their organizations, and building a powerful and positive force out in the world dedicated to empowering women, their voices, and their stories. Donate at onegirlrevolution.com/donate. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com/donate. You're doing such incredible work, and I know you're working with people all across the country, and I will, of course, post all of your social media links, your website, so people can reach out to you if they just want more information, if they want to sign up for your email list. But Halli, this podcast is all about stories. So I would love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, a couple of stories of people that have been helped through Porchlight Wellness. And I'll leave it to you, however you want to share their stories and whatever stories you'd like to share.
There's so many stories, but for some reason, one that pops to mind is a story of a woman who joined just one of our workshops. I think it was about a year ago. I led a Sunday night workshop about like digestive health. So now we'll talk about pooping. So this is like bodily work, right? And so for many people, myself included, who've experienced sexual violence, like a lot of it shows up in like the effects of it shows up in the digestive system. Either like not being able to keep your poop in, or not being able to let your poop out, or like, irritable bowel syndrome, like upset stomach, even like heartburn, indigestion, all that stuff. And it makes a lot of sense, actually, if we think about like how the nervous system operates, right? Because if the nervous system is holding on to trauma and is like stuck in fight or flight mode, it doesn't have the time to rest and digest, right? If our breathing is shallow, if our heart rate is rapid, like we literally like can't take the full breaths that we need to like let our food kind of like digest like in a healthy way through our bodies. And so I talk about digestive health a good amount in our work, and I work on my own digestive health in my own life. And I just remember a woman like coming to one of our workshops. She was a survivor. I think she lived in Manhattan. And she said, like, my whole life I've had digestive issues, and it never occurred to me that it was like connected to the trauma that I've experienced. And I don't know, like, as I'm sitting here, I'm like, why does that like matter to me? Like, why does that mean something to me? And it's actually making me emotional, but I think it goes back to, for me, this own feeling of like knowing something was off in like my body and my spirit for so long, but like not knowing what it was, feeling like even if I had a group of friends, I felt like I was like different or like odd. I think just like, it's so moving to me that like our workshop created this space just to validate what she was experiencing.
You're making me emotional. And it's so important for all of us to be thinking about this too. Our bodies are so fascinating and incredible, and so everything is so interconnected, which is what I love so much about the work that you're doing too. It's like this holistic approach to healing. It's this holistic approach, and my family's very into. My mom was a doula, so when you mentioned that your mom was a midwife, it's
wow.
like my mom was a doula. We're very into gut health and different things, but it was through our own experiences growing up and like noticing what's in your food, but also like how different traumas can affect us. And like as a little kid, I was getting terrible stomach aches, and nobody knew what was going on, and it ended up being stress from all the bullying. And it wasn't until we were kind of researching, and that was before the times of like Google and Whole Foods, and now we live in such a great place that now there are so many more resources. But that's what's so important, is for us to really create these spaces where we can look at the holistic, the whole person, this holistic approach to health and well-being and healing. And you're doing that, which is incredible.
Thanks. Yeah. The body keeps the score.
Right. Halli, why, I'm so curious why, like at the root of everything that you do, like what is at the root, why you do what you do? And maybe some of it is your own story. I'm sure that the people that you're working with on a daily basis fuel you and help you keep going. I know that's me with this podcast. A lot of times it can be a lot of work. But it's, every story and every person that I encounter, it leads me to continue to keep going. But if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do, what would you say that root is?
It's easy for me. It's love. For me, healing comes from the center of my heart, like the center of my chest. And really, in my best moments, not only do I feel that love for myself and my story and my journey, but I want to share it, right? The heart space is a space of connection, of gratitude, of community. And I think as soon as I realized like I was strong enough to let my heart break and let it break again and again and again, then I was strong enough to be in community and hold a community space. So grateful for it, And I have to say, like, growing up in a house that wasn't safe and a family that really like wasn't, safe in a lot of ways, like having the love of like my wife and my daughter in our own little family unit is the foundation I need to do the work that I do. So that when I close my laptop on a Friday night, even if I've done some heartbreaking work, either internally or externally, We can light the candles, we can have Shabbat. My daughter will drive me up the wall and like then give me a kiss, and like my heart will explode with love. And I can ask my wife how her week was. And like, to me, like the love, you're talking about spaghetti, like it's all interconnected.
Mm. Well, you're spreading so much love, and I know that you're empowering so many other people to spread love too. And I just feel it through this podcast, and I know everybody who's listening is feeling it. And I can't wait to continue to follow everything that you're doing and support it and be a part of it. And I know everybody who's listening is going to want to do the same thing. Halli, where do you go from here? So what's next for Porchlight Wellness? I know that you guys have grown so much in 3 years, which is also crazy to think about that, COVID hit right after you started it. And like, I'm sure that there have been a lot of transitions and changes and innovation and trying to figure out how to do things in a different way. But where do you go from here? And what are some of the things that you guys have on the horizon?
Thanks for asking. So we're yogis, so we like to think that we're flexible. So like COVID hit and we were like, let's teach online. Like it was pretty straightforward now in retrospect, but it was hard work to get it up and running. But what I'm most excited about in this kind of late pandemic world is getting to teach some more in-person stuff. So I live in DC, or based in DC. Before the pandemic hit, we were partnering with a number of transitional living facilities for women experiencing homelessness. Studies show that about 90% of women who are experiencing homelessness have experienced sexual trauma and sexual violence. It's very dangerous for a woman to not have safe housing. And so I'm excited just to like get in person and like feel that connection again, especially in our local DC community. I hope, to be honest, I can be doing this work for like a lot more decades to come. So like, hopefully you'll see me. I picture myself with like this big head of like gray hair and like these ripped jeans and like just like not giving a fuck what anyone thinks. Like, hopefully that's the direction that I'm headed in.
I can see it. I can see the vision of it. And I know that it's going to continue. And I know that you're just going to continue to grow and evolve. And I can't wait to be a part of it. And One Girl Revolution, we want to stay in touch with you and continue to support your work and spread awareness. And hopefully, we can collaborate and have you back on the podcast and different things for many, many years to come. But how can people support your work, and how can they get involved in what you're doing?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. And thank you for just like being such a sweet and kind listener. I really appreciate it. Okay. So to support our work, you can check out our website, porchlightwellness.org. You can check us out on Instagram. You can donate if you want through our website, no pressure, but we always really appreciate the support, especially like a monthly donation. And then join our workshops. Like, everyone is welcome, whether or not you've experienced sexual trauma. All of our workshops are safe and welcoming places. Join our teacher training if you're interested. And then, as I said, just sharing our work, even just like, hey, did you know about this? Like, check out this link. Really, really makes a difference. And to be honest, you never know, who needs it or who wants it. So the more sharing, the better. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will post all those links, like I said, in the show notes on our website so people can easily access it. And I think it's important for us on social media to be sharing, everybody please share everything that Halli is doing, because like you said, you never know who might need it. And that's an easy, free way that we can support your work and also to support survivors. Halli, I want to ask you, for survivors that are listening, because we know that there are many survivors who are listening to this podcast right now. And this is sort of a blanket question, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What would you say to those survivors? Maybe they've never shared their story before. Maybe they're kind of suffering in silence, or, feel marginalized or feel ignored, or, they're looking for healing. Obviously, they can reach out to you and be a part of your great work. But what would you say to survivors out there?
I love you. I see you. I'm here for you.
Well, and you've created such a great community for people to reach out. And then what would you say to people that, like all of us who are listening, who may know survivors? What can we do to support those in our lives. Obviously share your work, obviously get involved, maybe go to some of the trainings that you have, just so we have awareness and so we have knowledge. But what would you say to people? How can we support survivors in our everyday lives?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I really love that question. So I was teaching before the pandemic an in-person workshop in a yoga studio in Rochester, New York, where I grew up. And it was like a three hour workshop, I think. So we had a break in the middle, and this woman came up to me during the break, and she said, my boyfriend is really struggling with like how to support me. Like he really wants to be supportive, but I have bad days and good days, and like he just doesn't know what to do. And I was like, I don't know what your boyfriend should do. Like, that's not my job. Like, I'm here for you, not him. But maybe there's like a workshop for him. But I don't remember actually what I told her, but I went home and I asked my wife about it. And I was like, because my wife, God bless her, like she's a Taurus. So she's like rock solid, like steady, like really grateful for her support. So I said to her, like, what advice would you give for like, friends or loved ones or partners of survivors? And she said, be patient. And especially being the mom of a toddler, I have learned that love is patience and patience is love. So just be patient with us.
And love and community is so important, like what you've created and what you're creating. And I think we can always do that, welcome people into our homes and, be a support system and a listening ear for people and, help connect them with Porchlight Wellness or other organizations that are out there. But I am so grateful, Halli, to be connected with you. I can't wait. Like I said, I can't wait to continue to follow everything you're doing and stay in touch with you. Before I let you go, I always end this podcast on one question. So I'd like to ask you, because we focus on women and girls, the last question is, if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
I'm not sure about the whole world, but I'm thinking about my daughter. And I think if I could have like one little message resonate in her mind, right, as she grows into a woman, it would be, you got this.
Halli, well, you got this, and you are doing such incredible work. And thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you for being on the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. That's the number one girl REVO. And you can find more information on One Girl Revolution at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number one girlrevolution.com.